We're talking about Rick Grenell today. He stole the show at the CPAC 2024 in Mexico City. I went there for Robert Malone, Kerry Lake, and Tulsi Gabbard. And Rick was the one that I instantly had never heard of, but had to come home and research. As soon as I researched him, I seen some amazing interviews. The interview I'm going to show you today is of a leftist journalist and Rick Grenell, a populist, and the way they interact with each other. It's an amazing interview. But before I do, let's get a little bit of background on Rick here. So he was the director of national intelligence under Donald Trump. He's personal friends with J.D. Vance. He's an American first populist, and you'll see this in the interview. He was the ambassador to Germany under Donald Trump, who employed America First policies, and the Germans really didn't like him for it. Now, he also had one red flag on his resume, and it was the spokesman to the UN for the George Bush administration. But as I watched some interviews, he had really renounced a lot of what the George Bush administration was and the weapons of mass destruction hoax that they played on the American public. So he really took the Tucker Carlson approach to really evolving and understanding the situation and what really happened.
Considered as one of Donald Trump's close confidants, and you've defended him in the past years. And now there's a discussion ongoing if you would become the next Secretary of State.
Oh, Paul, come on.
If that's going to happen.
Oh, no, we got an election. We're concentrated on the election. If you know Donald Trump, you know that he is concentrating on this election. And so all of that is just silly talk right now. It's what reporters do. They like to figure out who's in, who's out. The reality is I tell my European friends, and I consider you a European friend, you know exactly what you're going to get from Donald Trump. Exactly what you got in the first term. There's no surprises.
So this was a great opener. You see Grenell and the reporter jockeying for position. When he says Donald Trump's not a threat, you know what you're going to get. Well, Trump was a no-war candidate, and he was good for the economy, and he had great international policies. And that's where this interview is going to go. So Grenell strategically set up the platform and what's going to go down.
Would you think German politicians would like you to become Secretary of State under Donald Trump?
I don't care what they think. Where this is about America. Look, I have this belief that when we follow Donald Trump's lead and we put America first, just like every other country puts themselves first. I spent 8 years at the UN. 193 countries put themselves first. I've been in tens of thousands of diplomatic meetings with other countries. There's never been a meeting that I've been in where the other country doesn't ask us to do something. We have to put ourselves first. We have a $35 trillion national debt, Paul. Think about that. Germans get a budget surplus every year. We have a $35 trillion national debt. We'd like airports like Munich Airport. We would love to have an opera house on every corner. We would love to have the infrastructure that Germany has. We are spending too much money. And so from our perspective, when we put America first, we're a rules-based country. We don't go in and conquer. We don't take your oil. When America puts itself first, the rule of law follows, democracy follows, capitalism follows. It benefits the world when we put ourselves first.
And I think that was a perfect condensed version of what America first means. Putting America first doesn't mean putting everybody else last, but it means every country should strategically put their people first, not the elites, not the academics, but the people. If the people are put first, you're going to have a strong government, you're going to have a strong country. So if you have a strong Mexico, a strong United States, and a strong Canada individually, when they come together, they're going to make a great coalition. Right now, we have weak governments that are very corrupt and don't put their people first. So when they come together in these coalitions, it's a bunch of corrupt coalitions and corrupt politicians that aren't putting their people first.
Olaf Scholz said in 2019 he had been moved to tears by J.D. Vance's best-selling book. And in an interview exactly 1 year ago, the chancellor said and described it as a tragedy that Vance seems to have turned from a self-declared conservative opponent of Donald Trump to a fiery supporter of this right-wing populist in order to gain his support. So Scholz is calling Trump the right-wing populist. What do you make out of that?
Well, I would say that J.D. Vance and me, who were friends, we are right. We are a populist, and I don't take offense to that because the opposite of that is a left-wing elitist.
And that was perfect. He just embraces being a right-wing populist because it's not a shameful thing. It's actually a great thing. Food freedom, medical freedom, political freedom, and financial freedom is what modern populism is about. And Grenell seems to be on the cutting edge of this, along with J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. So let's get back into this.
Do you think Scholz is a left-wing elitist?
I do. I think that what has happened is that a lot of parties in Germany have been overtaken by a few people who like the system and they want to keep the system, but it doesn't benefit the people. I mean, look at the German economy right now. I like Olaf Scholz. I actually really enjoyed my limited time with him. I thought he was very smart. But, politicians do politician things and they do doublespeak and they say things like, I love the book. And then, suddenly the author of the book is a Republican. They're like, I don't like that. And that's silly. We all see that. We all see the double standard of that. He thinks he's getting away with it, but he's not.
Ricarda Lang, the head of the Green Party,
So that's the truth. He put Scholz in as a left-wing extremist or a left-wing elitist who really doesn't want to work with populists or the people. And this is the problem with Germany. It's a two-tiered system where you have the government elites versus the people. The people's interests are completely separated from the government.
Commented on Vance's nomination and said it's worrying for Europe.
Europe has a war going on. He didn't have a war when Donald Trump was president.
So, what do you make out of it that German politicians think?
Look, Paul, you and I know that when I was in Germany, I was defending Donald Trump's policy. The German government, I wouldn't say the German people. I want to bifurcate the German government from the people. The German government was really harsh against America's policy on Nord Stream 2. The German government was incredibly terrible towards Donald Trump's policies on the 2% NATO instruction. The German government hated and moved around the Donald Trump policy on Iran to sanction that country. Now, I could argue that Nord Stream 2 was one of the reasons why we have the war in Ukraine. The German government didn't listen to Donald Trump. I'd like an apology on that because you all have a war in Europe because of the weakness of Joe Biden and Chancellor Merkel, who lobbied to drop the sanctions that Trump had. Remember all those nasty headlines? You should play some of those. Attacking us for wanting sanctions on Nord Stream 2. All the nasty headlines on the 2% push. All of the nasty headlines on telling German companies to don't do business with Iran. When you squeeze Iran and they don't have money to support Hezbollah and Hamas and to start a war in Israel. So I could go back and say, if the German government had followed the 2%, the Nord Stream 2, and the Iran policies of Donald Trump, I don't believe we would have two major wars. I don't hear them apologizing, but I do hear them changing their position quietly. They now agree with Donald Trump, but they won't say we were wrong. What would be?
And this is the thing. When you do fund Iran, you give them money to fund terrorism. And Nord Stream had no oil running through it during the Donald Trump administration. It wasn't until Biden got in and lowered the sanctions on Germany that they allowed the oil to run through the pipeline. And then Biden didn't like that. So then the Nord Stream pipeline magically got blown up by who? We don't know. Maybe the US, maybe Ukraine. There's been all kinds of crazy articles. But let's get back into it.
Your advice to the chancellor, to the ministers in Germany now, because we have a discussion in Germany ongoing what to do now that the possibility, is pretty high that Donald Trump could become president. What's like, should these politicians do? Experts say it makes sense and is a great advantage to talk to Trump again and again, or even to play golf with him. What advice would you give them?
Look, I think it's pretty simple. I don't think it's complicated. I think governments that take care of its people, that listen to the people, are the ones that really do well. So I don't think that the German government should do anything but listen to its people. Let the people be more in charge. Listen to what they want. They like Americans, want the government to put themselves first and to take care of Germany first.
But how to talk to Donald Trump? Should Olaf Scholz learn golf?
No, I don't. I mean, I think Donald Trump is a pretty simple guy. He's fantastic at the back and forth of talking about. So just present your ideas and you can talk to him and there's a deal to be made.
Should Scholz call him now?
Of course. I mean, look, Joe Biden hasn't spoken to Vladimir Putin in 3 years. And there's a war in Europe going on because the Russians invaded Ukraine. And the leader of the world, Joe Biden, has not even spoken to Vladimir Putin. I think speaking to people is a tactic. It's not a goal. It's not the...
And this is one of my biggest problems with Biden. He's not talking to the US's enemies, whether that's Kim Jong-un, whether that's Putin, whether that's the leader of Iran. Like, we need to talk to our enemies so we can make deals and prevent war from happening.
The solution, but it's how you start talking about the goal and solutions.
Before we talk about the war in Ukraine, I would like to focus a little bit more on Germany because we're wondering what would happen if Donald Trump...
You know what would happen, same as the first term.
Becomes president. So what will happen to U.S. military bases in Germany?
Look, we're not going to talk about what would happen in the Donald Trump administration specifically because we're in an election. We're trying to win. But again, there's no secret. There's no secret. I mean, it's exactly what you're going to get from the first term, which is, we want to see American money spent well. We want to take care of the American people first. And we got to somehow deal with this $35 trillion national debt.
According to an agreement between Biden and Scholz, U.S. missiles and cruise missiles with a range as far as Moscow are to be stationed in Germany from 2026. Would President Trump stick to these plans?
We're concentrated on the election.
Good talking point. Stick to what's in front of us. We don't want to take this election for granted, but we do know what we get from a Trump presidency. We get peace at home and good international policy that avoids war. So I think that's what the people want ultimately. And he focuses on the U.S. economy and how to make it strong in the long term.
Donald Trump has said that he will no longer defend defaulting allies. No,
that's not true. Let me be clear on that. That's not true, Paul.
Okay, but
the question was that somebody came to him and said, if the allies said to you, no, we're not going to pay our 2%, then what would you do? Would you still defend them? Now, I know you don't have children, but if you had a child and a child said to you, I know the rule, I'm not going to obey it, do you let him slide? The question was, what do you do if an ally looks at you and says, I will not abide by the 2014 Wales Pledge? There is only one answer that you could give if someone stands up and says, I as a country will not abide by the 2014 Wales Pledge. I'm not going to pay my 2%.
Scholz's reaction was, and I quote, any relativization of the mutual assistance guarantee is dangerous.
Again, I think the most dangerous thing is undermining NATO and not paying your fair share.
NATO is Europe's military. So either Europe wants to pay the 2% for NATO, or they can go about building their own factories and their own military, or they can do both. But if they don't want to pay the 2%, then it's as if they don't want to build their own military or their own self-defense. And they have to be held accountable for that.
If you are trying to pretend like you're a full participant in NATO and you're not paying your obligations, then I think that's very dangerous, to be part of a club and not pay your dues.
The slogan at the NATO summit now in Washington was more or less, we must make the alliance Trump safe. That's what people said there. What do you think about it?
I think that's what the media said.
What do you think about it?
I know world leaders. I know members of NATO who are heads of state. And privately, they'll tell you NATO was much stronger under Donald Trump.
The NATO states have also decided in Washington that Ukraine's path to NATO is irreversible. Will Ukraine join NATO?
Well, first of all, no one can commit the United States to future policies.
But
no one. You can't tell us that what our policy is in 2028 or 2027 or 2026. You can't do that. That's undemocratic. It's un-American. So we have one president at a time. Joe Biden is the president. He gets to make all the decisions. We have an election in November. We'll see what happens.
So let's talk.
And this is the thing. The Democratic Party is trying to pin the United States to Europe to support Ukraine for this new forever war, like it was the previous forever war in Afghanistan. Now, Trump makes the decisions he wants to make. You can't go committing the Trump administration to the mistakes of the Biden administration. Trump wants to take a completely different tack, and that's negotiations. And he wants to end the war within 24 hours.
About Ukraine, there was many statements from Donald Trump. The most outspoken was probably that he could achieve peace in 24 hours with sitting down with Putin and Zelensky. Do you really think this is realistic?
100%. I mean, look, Donald Trump had peace agreements between Arabs and Israelis. Donald Trump had no wars in Europe. And I think the reality is that he has what I would call a credible threat. There's a difference between a threat of military action and a credible threat of military action. And the difference is the messenger. So I'm going to give you an example to answer the question. When an evangelical pastor by the name of Pastor Brunson was held against his will in Turkey, it's very disheartening for many Americans. We were very upset by it because this NATO ally was holding a pastor against his will. And we didn't get a lot of action from the Turks. And it bubbled up and finally went to Donald Trump. And he said to Erdogan, if you do not release this pastor, I will ruin your economy starting tomorrow. Now, Pastor Brunson was released by the next day. And I think the difference is that Erdogan believed that Donald Trump was going to do something immediately.
And this is what a lot of people believed, whether it was when he negotiated with Putin or Xi or the leader of North Korea. He went there, spoke to him face to face, and when he made threats, they took him as credible. Even if they were unlikely, there was credibility to those.
But he didn't think that Donald Trump would send a white paper down to the Treasury and to the State Department for a thoughtful process of 3 months to figure out what to do. He knew that the next morning there would be tariffs or isolation or whatever. My point in telling you this story is that there's a difference between a threat of action, whether it's sanctions or military action, tariffs. The difference between a threat and a credible threat is totally known by the parties. And I believe that the Ukrainian leader and the Russian leader absolutely understand that Donald Trump has credibility on these issues. And so, yeah, do I think that he could solve this fast? Absolutely.
And this is the thing. It seemed like Joe Biden's plan with Russia was sanction, 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 and it didn't work and it backfired. And the Russian economy is actually strong right now. So what more can they do with Russia? A lot of the leverage, if they do end up negotiating, is taken out. So I'm very interested to see the Trump strategy when it comes to Ukraine and Russia if he does get in.
Let's talk about Putin a little bit longer, because now there were statements coming in from the Foreign Minister Lavrov, who's happy about J.D. Vance becoming.
Not what he said.
Yeah, well, I describe it.
Okay.
Becoming nominee. So what J.D. Vance said, he doesn't care about Ukraine and, shouldn't put more money in. Is that how it will go?
Okay, first of all, let me correct you. J.D. Vance has never said he doesn't care about Ukraine. And the reality is you should have started this question with me by saying Vladimir Putin announced that he wants Joe Biden for president. He said, I prefer Joe Biden because he is predictable. Goes back to my other point about the unpredictability and the credibility.
And you think that was an honest opinion of Vladimir Putin?
Well, why do you think that Lavrov gave an honest opinion about JD? So you're switching when it's convenient. What I'm telling you is that Vladimir Putin went public and said, I prefer Joe Biden because he is predictable. He gave you a reason. And guess what, Paul? Vladimir Putin is right that Joe Biden is predictable. There is no unpredictability. So I think it's really important for the Europeans to understand this, because the media are going to cloud this issue. Vladimir Putin wants Joe Biden to win this election because he doesn't want to have to deal with an unpredictable, credible Donald Trump. So when you say to me that Lavrov says something like, oh, J.D. Vance is on the ticket, he's being nice and he says something, of course, what are they supposed to say? Like, they don't attack it right away.
How would you describe
Joe Biden's tiptoeing to a war in Ukraine? We're not involved. We're not involved. We're not involved. We're giving them weapons. We have soldiers on the ground training them there. Next thing you know, we're going to be in a war. Donald Trump is going to address this issue head on and try to negotiate peace. Joe Biden won't even talk to Vladimir Putin. So how are we supposed to get a peace negotiation going? They already ripped up one agreement. So let's see what happens.
The relation between Trump and Putin.
Look, first of all, I think you just got to look at the evidence, because Donald Trump is somebody who absolutely is fighting for American safety and looks at threats and looks at friends or opponents, and even enemies. He looks at them and says, I have to do everything I can to keep Americans prosperous and safe. So that's why he crossed the line and went in to see Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un was firing missiles, very hostile towards us, threatens where I live in Los Angeles. I know a lot of East Coasters don't really pay that much attention to North Korea. We on the West Coast absolutely have to pay attention. It threatens Los Angeles, where I live. And so I was happy to see the president go in and engage with Kim Jong-un. I wouldn't say that they're friends, but I would say that they talk. And I would say that he's maneuvering to protect Americans. It's the same with Vladimir Putin. Look, Vladimir Putin and his media operation attacked Donald Trump and me consecutively over Nord Stream 2. Constantly. They didn't like that. They didn't want sanctions. It was Chancellor Merkel and Joe Biden who got together and dropped those sanctions because that's what Putin wanted. You can go look at the speeches that Senate Democrats made in Washington, D.C. on this issue. And they literally said, we have to drop these sanctions because if we stick it in the eye of the Russians, it would be more dangerous. Now, Paul, they were flat wrong, because what was more dangerous is weakness.
How could
Now we look at what the relationship between Trump and Putin, and they have a long relationship with open dialogue. And this is going to be absolutely crucial. So let's see what happens.
peace look like from your perspective? Because when I talk to Ukrainians, they say that Vladimir Putin has no interest for peace, that Vladimir Putin wants full region in Ukraine.
Well, that's what he says under Joe Biden. That's what he says under Joe Biden. So here's what I would just say about that. I don't want to get into great details. I haven't talked to President Trump about this. I know you guys are really hungry and you should be pushing us on these issues. But the reality is that I would sit here and talk to you about Michigan and Pennsylvania and how we win for hours and hours. That's what we're concentrating on. So what a peace plan looks like, I haven't talked to Trump. Let me just give you a little bit of my perspective, just my personal. Again, I don't speak for the president. I haven't talked to him about this. This is literally just Rick Grenell's thoughts. I think that there were problems with Minsk and Minsk II, but I think there are some elements there that are good. I think autonomous regions sound pretty good. I think territorial integrity is a must. And yet, there's a whole bunch of other elements that we have to worry about. The Russians signed Minsk. I don't know if they ever really wanted to implement it. But one lesson that I learned from the Kosovo-Serbia negotiations is that the person who does the negotiations, who looks at both sides and tries to pull in both sides to say, need you to move this way and I need you to move this way, the person who does that knows the vulnerabilities and knows where they didn't quite want to go, but forged an agreement. And so the most important part, when you finally get two sides to come together to agree on something, the most important thing is the follow-up and holding them to account. The person that needs to do that are the ones who negotiated, because they know where the weaknesses are and where they slightly moved and they didn't want to move, but they did.
And they had this with the Minsk Accords, and the Minsk Accords were just totally disrespected by Europe and torn up. They were a temporary solution that could have gone on to either be re-signed or something similar could have been signed, because it kept both sides in check for the time being at that time.
You have to be able to use the carrots and the sticks in that instance. Remind them why they signed. We know you don't love moving this way. We know you don't love making this concession, but it's really important to do so. And I would say that the failures of Minsk, where we didn't have any follow-up. Once that was signed, a whole bunch of people celebrated and moved on.
Well, there were follow-ups and even meetings with Zelensky and Putin, and
not with credible people.
Merkel and
not with
Macron.
Credible people.
Well, I would say the two are credible. But let me ask you.
There would be different under a Trump administration. There would be absolute holding people to their commitment.
And this is the difference. With a Kamala Harris administration, you're going to get more of the same of Joe Biden. What does that mean? Anthony Blinken. Anthony Blinken is the one negotiating these deals, and he's completely inept. His big strategy is, I'm not talking to bad people, so he's refusing to talk to these leaders of these countries.
Talking about what would happen if Donald Trump becomes president, also in regard of Ukraine, do you expect Germany, Europe to pay more for Ukraine than they're doing now?
Sure, of course, it's a war in Europe.
That means?
It's in your backyard. If there was a war in Mexico, we would be doing the majority of the work, if not all of the work. And we certainly wouldn't ask the Germans to help us if there was a war in Mexico. So I would put it this way. Are the Germans helping us with our border war? Are they sending us money because we have this problem at the border? Shared values, NATO, we're having an invasion on our border. But I don't hear a lot of talk about that. And look, I'm half joking. I'm half joking. I'm not suggesting that. Let's not have a headline that says Rick is asking the Germans for money for the border. But my point is when we talk about shared responsibility, it goes two ways.
So does it mean the U.S. won't pay anything anymore to Ukraine, or less?
That's a decision for Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone. We're concentrating on Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and we got to win.
This is a European war, and if Europe wants to fight this war, then they need to ante up for their 2% for each country. And the U.S. is basically the military factory for Europe, not the other way around. And the U.S. isn't asking Europe for help. Europe is asking the U.S. for help. And if they want that help, they should pay for it.
Talking about this, right now there's a kind of open revolt against Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. The majority of
This interview is a month old, so they're still talking about Joe Biden instead of Kamala Harris as the candidate.
Democrats say he shouldn't run. Do you still expect that Joe Biden will run against Trump?
First of all, we had an election in this country through the democratic process, the democratic primary. The Democrats chose Joe Biden. The people across this country in all 50 states voted for Joe Biden. What you're talking about is some elites in the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. that don't like the poll numbers. So they want to throw out what the people voted for. I remember hearing something about undermining democracy, blah, blah, blah. If we're going to talk about undermining democracy, I think throwing Joe Biden off the ticket that he just ran on and just won on should be an outrage of Axel Springer media.
But it could still happen that Joe Biden says he doesn't want to run anymore.
Okay, well, that's a separate story. I think he's being shoved off the stage by a lot of elites who are undermining democracy. They voted for Joe Biden. By the way, are you telling me that suddenly in July of 2024, Joe Biden suddenly got dementia? We all saw it last year. They voted for him knowing exactly who he was. They should not undermine the vote of the people. And so I think when you say the majority of Democrats want him off the stage, the majority of Democrat elites, the people still want Joe Biden, the Democrats.
They did it to Bernie Sanders not once, but twice. They did it to Tulsi Gabbard. They've done it to Trump now. They are just fiddling with democracy in such ways they no longer have a democracy. They've installed Kamala Harris as the candidate, even though she has no votes. So we've seen RFK endorse Trump. And why did he endorse Trump? Because the way the Democratic Party blocked him from the primaries and then blocked him as an independent candidate.
I asked you at the beginning what Olaf Scholz should do. What I asked you at the beginning what Olaf Scholz should do now with Donald Trump. Is there any politician in Germany, this is my last question, who he respects a lot?
Who's he?
Donald Trump.
Look, I love the German people. I mean, I have so many friends who are Germans, and I love the camaraderie that we have. Germans and Americans are a lot alike. German businesses, American businesses are so intertwined.
And you're seeing this in the EU a lot. The people and the government are two different things. The same in Canada. Trump is representing the American people for the most part. So hopefully he gets into office. But all around the world, especially in Western countries, you're seeing the people their needs are separate from what the government wants.
I think the problem is the German government. And I think the German government is just not listening to the people. And that's just my opinion. I think when it comes to Donald Trump, there's no mystery. You just have to deal with him like he's another leader of a country who's fighting for his people. And so talk to them, talk to him, talk to his people if he's elected. I want to make sure that throughout this whole interview that we're really sensitive to the fact that I'm not putting the cart before the horse, as we say in America. We're concentrating on the election. I have no idea what's going to happen in November. I certainly hope that Donald Trump wins. We're fighting hard. But the, ideas of what's going to happen in a second term, I want in no way to make it seem like I think it's a done deal.
But is there one politician he respects the most?
I've said this for a long time, and
he's trying to get him to say Viktor Orban, and that's the thing. Like, he's not getting dragged into this, and he's not taking the bait. They're really trying to frame him as a far-right populist, and they think that's a bad thing.
I really believe it, that Germany has the ability to be Donald Trump's favorite country. It's well run. It's got a great economy. And by well run, I mean the society works. right? It's got great structure, and the people are have a strong voice, and the economy can be enormous. It's a very powerful country, and so I would say the person that leads Germany in a way that that pays attention to the people and makes decisions for Germany and doesn't try to, get in other countries' businesses. That's what we're trying to do in America. We're trying to concentrate on ourselves with a $35 trillion national debt. That doesn't mean we're going to go it alone or we're going to be an isolationist. No, I believe that when America puts itself first, the rules-based system is celebrated and everyone benefits from that. We're going to be great partners, but we're going to form coalitions around things like we think Iran should be sanctioned. And so we might try to do it through the UN. If the UN doesn't want to do it, then maybe we would go somewhere else, just like we did in the first term. Form a coalition of the willing for sanctions. We need to be able to rely on our friends to help us on things like that. But we want to not start any new wars. We want to end wars. We want to concentrate on the economy. Donald Trump's tenure is about growing the economy and helping people be prosperous instead of war. But I do think that we're in this cycle where a lot of governments just like to push war as the only option. And I'll leave you with this. It's my
The neocons have such a grip on American politics that that's why Trump's having such trouble with traditional politicians. We have the uniparty of war, the Democrats and the traditional Republicans.
last point. It still bothers me very much that for 30 days, 45 days, all we heard from Joe Biden was the Russians are coming into Ukraine. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. We have evidence. We have intel. We shared that intel. The Russians are coming. Why didn't Anthony Blinken take his plane and get European foreign ministers to Kiev or Moscow to stop a war? Why wasn't there
Well, there was Scholz, there was Macron, there was many trying.
It wasn't. We did not have a serious effort of going in and saying, a war is coming. We're going to stop this. Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, all they talked about is get the money ready, get the war machine going, because we're going to have to help because a war is coming.
Do you support what Viktor Orban is doing now, the Hungarian prime minister, talking to Putin, talking to Zelensky, talking to Chinese?
Well, let me just step away and say, I think talking to people is a really good idea. I'm a diplomat, and I think that the way that you solve problems is through talking. So.
And you've seen the journalist come in at the end talking about Viktor Orban, and he finally said the name because he couldn't get Rick to say the name. The journalist so badly wanted it. But that's Rick Grenell, and now you got to see him in a pretty solid interview. He's an American first populist. Adios.